Welcome to This Week in Money. I'm Jim Goddard. Today, CIBC Wood Gundy's Ross Clark is hot on agricultural commodities. Trends Journal publisher Gerald Celente warns China's economic slowdown is very real. Money Bubble author John Rubino believes Greece is just a sign of several dangerously weak economies. We'll talk to Ross Clark right after this.
More and more people are looking to the internet for intelligent, riveting, and thought-provoking interviews. To advertise on the Goddard Report and TalkDigitalNetwork.com, call 604-699-8600, 604-699-8600.
Welcome to This Week in Money, the source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Ross Clark, investment advisor at CIBC Wood Gundy in Vancouver. Welcome to This Week in Money, Ross.
It's nice to be with you, Jim.
What's happening in the agricultural scene?
Well, it's an area that we haven't talked about much in the last couple of years because it's been just a classic bear market. A lot of these markets go through big 7-year cycles, in particular the agricultural market. And, we peaked out back in early 2008. Wheat and corn prices were at very significant high levels, and they've just been, as I say, eroding right through until this spring. But in the last few months, there's been a dramatic increase in the commercial positions. That's in the futures contracts by the commercials who have been establishing bullish positions in anticipation of some potential problems this summer, weather-wise and with yields. And in the last couple of weeks, we've started to see a good breakout on the upside in terms of prices. So we know we've got large open interest, so we've got a fair number of short positions, speculative positions that have been in here for, even the last 12 months, we've seen probably a 20% or 30% drop in prices. So you've got the trend following systems, all short, all in the process of starting to reverse their positions. And when I look back at some of the technicals that we use to measure the extent of the declines, the monthly charts here on corn, soybeans, wheat, all produced very, very significant oversold readings back in February, March. They then went around to test those lows and make the turn. So this looks as though it could be more than just a short-lived move off the bottom, something that people may want to take a pretty close look at. If we start to see increases in these food prices, it will feed through the system as far as the inflationary aspects are concerned, and it could even push out into some of the other commodities, non-agricultural, maybe even the silver market, which used to trade side by side in the pits in Chicago with the soybeans. So I'm keeping an eye on that. And the nice thing these days for every investor who is looking for a little bit of speculative action, there are ETFs in virtually all of the commodities, or you could grab the ETF that's the basket of them, the DBA, that's the Deutsche Bank Agricultural ETF. So, for the equity market, which has been absolutely flat this year, you might be looking for opportunities elsewhere. Is the
agricultural market a bit different than the rest of the equity market in the fact that it's so weather dependent?
Well, it is weather dependent, but also, you go to the point of looking at just classic supply demand, and there's these long-term cycles that we end up with, and eventually you get down cheap enough that you'll get a good reaction. We've got El Nino sitting out this right now, for the potential action there. We've seen some pretty big grain moves historically around El Nino years. So I think it's something that you might take a good hard look at. And on the other side of the coin, we've got a commodity, crude oil, which had a 45 to 50% rally off the lows of the back there in February. And that has had its sort of classic rally off a bottom. Typically, you're going to be about 45 to 50%. This has been a 48% rally. The top of that initial rally off the bottom, when we go back, there's maybe half a dozen of these bad bear markets like we had last year leading into February of this year. The classic reaction is about a 3 to 4 month move to the upside in that 45 to 50% bracket. You generally get above the 200-day moving average, and this one didn't. This one came a couple of dollars shy of the moving average, and now it's starting to roll over and get heavy. We're starting to see some inventory numbers picking up again. We haven't had that up until a couple of weeks ago, so the oil market's doing this slow rolling top right now. And the classic action here is that we would be looking for it to give back 50 to 62% of the rally off the bottom. So we're trading around $55 to $56 at the end of this week. Looks like a $50 to $52 target is a pretty realistic one to be looking at as we move through the next couple of weeks.
Ross, have a great weekend.
You too, and don't get too much sun.
Well, I try, but it's so tempting. My guest has been Ross Clark, investment advisor at CIBC Wood Gundy, Vancouver. His email address, ross.clark@cibc.ca. Coming up, Trends Journal publisher Gerald Celente here on This Week in Money.
Always consult your investment professional before making any investment decision. This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
Gerald Celente, publisher of the Trends Journal, available at trendsjournal.com, is on the line from historic Kingston, New York. Welcome back to This Week in Money, Gerald.
Thanks for having me on, Jim.
We're experiencing turmoil around the world. There's Greece, Puerto Rico, and China. Let's start with Greece. Do you see a trend evolving for the old republic?
Yes, we do, and it's just really an indicator of what else is going on throughout much of Europe. And just that Greece is in a little bit worse shape than Spain and Portugal and Italy and Ireland, and it's all coming to a head. You know, you go back a couple of years ago, Jim, and all the news was how they were going to get rid of these political parties and put in technocrats to fix the problem. It seems as though everyone has a bit of attention deficit disorder from the mainstream business media that pumped up this baloney and shoved it down our throats as though that was going to be the solution. And of course the solution was to put in a bunch of low-life puppets, call them technocrats, and steal the money from the people to pay off the bad debts that banks, hedge funds, and other groups made. But that's not in the news anymore. Not a peep about it from the prostitutes. So it's going on in Greece. There's no solution. Whether or not they vote yes or no to go with the austerity measures, yes means robbing them of more of what they have. They call it privatization. Grown-ups call it stealing valuable public assets and selling it to their buddies at bargain basement prices, whether robbing them of their pensions and retirement, whether increasing the retirement age to after you die. There's not going to be any solution. It's only going to get worse.
Is Greece basically the canary in the coal mine? What happens there could happen in the rest of Europe?
It's happening in the rest of Europe. You look at the unemployment rate in Greece, and you compare it to what's going on in Spain. Youth unemployment in Italy, 40%. Italy's in a recession. I just got back there from Italy. I went to the Milan Expo, which was a total waste of time. More hype and nothing there. And I drove down the coast of Rome for about 60 miles. And about 20 miles outside of Rome, you start seeing on the coast, boarded up buildings, migrants everywhere. Europe is being flooded with migrants. And I wonder why. Couldn't be because of the psychopaths that start war like Sarkozy and Cameron and Obama and Clinton and Bush that have destabilized the entire Middle East and North Africa and other parts of Africa. No, that couldn't do it. And then you look at the unemployment rates in Portugal and in Ireland and the migration rates of people leaving there. So this is real. There's no solution to it. It's all been one big cover-up. Matter of fact, the Bank of International Settlements just a few days ago also pointed that out. that this is unprecedented in world history, where they've made interest rates so low that corporations could borrow money and buy back their stock, borrowing money at nothing, driving up the prices, and all of these mergers and acquisitions done on borrowing money for free and then buying up other companies, driving up the asset prices, gutting the companies, and the sharks that do it become multi-billionaires. So, there's no solution. And it's worldwide. They're doing it everywhere.
Do you fear that interest rates are about to go up at the wrong time, or is that a helpful thing to do?
Well, it's helpful. They should have been way up before. People say, Mr. Celente, you called it wrong. Yeah, I call it wrong. I thought they would have raised interest rates in 2014 in March. Totally irresponsible to go into the 91st month of 0% interest rate policy. How about for all the rest of us people that don't want to speculate in stock markets? Where do we put our money? Once upon a time, when I was a young man, they used to have a thing called savings accounts. And people put money in banks, and they got an interest that was above the inflation rate. And they'd be able to retire on it. Now you put the money in the bank, and it actually costs you, considering for inflation. So this is just one big Ponzi scheme. The only thing it's done is boosted the equity markets, as I said, through stock buybacks and mergers and acquisitions. The facts are there. That's not speculation. Don't believe me? Well, go to the Bank of International Settlements, the Bankers Bank.
What's the situation in Puerto Rico?
It's more of the same. It's Detroit offshore, another place going bust. Look at the migration rates coming out of Puerto Rico. It's several percent over the last several years leaving the country. You have a 40% workers, 40% of the people are in the employment field. You have a large number of people on social welfare. There's no way out. And it's going to be other states as well. So you're going to start seeing real bond problems start to ripple through. Because, when they put these bonds on, they dump them in with other mutual funds that are buying up bonds. So it's not like they were just buying Puerto Rican bonds. They're buying state bonds, and Puerto Rican bonds are included in many of the other ones. So you're going to start seeing some real fallout start happening in the bond market because there's no way out. What are they going to do? How are they going to bail out Puerto Rico? What's the solution? They don't have jobs. The economy's on slowdown to decline. So it's only going to get worse.
What about the Shanghai Exchange? It's taken a huge tumble already. Is that another indicator of what could happen in Asia?
That's the biggest news out there that's not making the news. It's down almost 25% after doubling in the last year. And the Chinese government, it's another rigged game. They're doing everything they can to prop up the market, lowering interest rates, lowering margin calls, whatever they can do. And they're coming out with it, but they don't say rigged. They say they're trying to prevent, from going lower. And if you take off the rise in the Chinese equity markets over the last year, you could knock down their GDP rate by about 1.3%. A lot of the boost of the GDP rate, which is still only at 7%, big for us, of course, but not big enough for China, you're looking at it now, at about 5.7. And that's record lows for, over the last 30 years. So you're looking at some real problems that are igniting over there. I should say about 25 years. That are igniting in China, and there's no way out. What China's greatest fear is? It's not that America's pivot to Asia by building more bases and becoming more militarized in that area. It's its people. 1.2 billion of them. When they're out of work and things are getting worse, it's not a happy situation. They have revolts popping up all over the place. So they're doing everything they can to prop up their market. As property prices are declining, the bubble is burst in the real estate market. China, to me, is the big one to watch. And then you look at all of the other countries that were booming because of the record low interest rates and all the cheap money flowing into them, the hot money, like Indonesia. The rupee is down 7% against the dollar this year. So that's keep interest rates high at a time when the economy's going down. And now it's being even hard to deal with yen and dollars in Indonesia, trying to restrict other currencies from coming in there so they can protect their own. So it's a very simple formula. If Americans and Europeans don't buy things, China, Indonesia, Vietnam, Bangladesh, all of these countries, they stop making things. And if they stop making things, countries that are rich in natural resources, like Australia and Brazil and Canada and Chile and Bolivia and other nations, they stop exporting to other countries that were making things that needed their natural resources. So it's one big cycle, and it's very apparent. I mean, you look what's going on in Brazil. Besides the corruption scandals, which are endemic, and not only there, name the country, and you just scratch the surface and there's corruption, but they're going into a recession. They're in recession. And this is one of the BRIC nations. So when people are looking for the BRIC nations to be an alternative to the IMF or the World Bank or the United States reserve currency, they have their own problems. Again, whether it's China, India, Brazil, Russia, and of course South Africa, the last S on BRICS, that's just an S. It really doesn't mean much of anything, but they're in terrible trouble too, as platinum, gold, and silver prices decline, which are big exporting items for that country.
With those countries, I want to know, they were going to come up with an independent investment fund to try to challenge the current one. Has that gone anywhere?
Again, we're only looking at it as a temporary move in terms that there are slowdowns around the world. So are they going to be a threat to the reserve currency of the United States? I doubt it, because they have their own problems. And the only reason the United States currency is strong at any level is because the other ones are so weak. So I can't see, a threat to the United States reserve currency, as other people are saying there will be. Not because of the strength of the United States, just the weakness of all those other countries. And what's China going to do? Their market has crashed. Can anyone call a 25% decline in 2 weeks a crash? This might be at the level of the crash of 1929. And the reason being is that because there are so many retail investors in there. As gambling lost its favor in Macau, it became really big in the mainland China. Again, stocks increased 100% in a year. So they're in trouble, and their real estate bubble has popped. Last month, their oil exports in China were down some 18%. Oil imports were down 18%. That's huge. You could buy a ton of cabbage in China cheaper than you could buy a ton of iron ore. So who's going to challenge the dollar? That doesn't mean that in future years there might not be a challenge because of China's, Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank that's challenging the World Bank and the IMF. And some 57 countries have joined in already, but not for the short term. For the short term, there's going to be a lot of turmoil as we see it. Matter of fact, the panic is on.
I was just going to ask, with a lot of trouble in the world, how come gold and silver still seem to be stuck in one place?
I don't know. The only thing I can say is that we know for a fact that 5 banks were convicted, not charged, convicted of felonies for rigging the LIBOR rates, the interest rates, in the Forex market, the currency markets. But of course, none of their heads rolled, because we live in a neo-feudal society where you have different sets of rules for the economic elite and the political nobility. But you don't cross that yellow line. Make sure you don't go over the speed limit. Put your signal light on. Lower those brights when another car comes in your opposite direction. How many drinks did you have? Where'd you come from? You'll get questioned up and down, harassed and humiliated, and even beaten up if you get out of line. But in a neo-feudal society with different laws for the wealthy, for example, you think the political elite and the economic nobility have to go through TSA and get felt up and humiliated? No, they fly private, and they just whiz through. So going back to your question, why is gold down? I believe because it's being manipulated. And the facts are there. Manipulation is rampant. I just talked about how China's trying to manipulate their market. It's no secret. They just use white shoe boy language to cover it up. They say they're lowering margin rates, they're pumping money into different investment funds to to juice. Yeah, it's rigging it. And they rig the LIBOR and they rig the Forex, because here's the deal, Jim. Gold prices, when they spike, it will show the fraud, the Ponzi scheme, the disgusting bring down of society by the central bankers who have printed all of this fiat money, lowered interest rates to record lows, dumped in schemes from Abenomics to quantitative easing to 0% interest rates to enrich the filthy rich. So when you find out what a Ponzi scheme this is, gold prices skyrocket and people start dumping out of the currencies. They don't want that to happen and will do anything they can to prevent it. Hey, if you were Greek and you lived in Greece and the banks are closed, you wish you had some gold coins. And by the way, how could people be so stupid over there? How could they be waiting online at banks to get money out? How could anyone leave their money in a Greek bank knowing that this crisis was unfolding week after week after week after month after year? So I would say to people to be cautious about how much money you have in the bank, because if you see a crisis happening, you can see what they're going to do. They use that white shoe boy language of bank holiday. Holiday. We're going to have a holiday. What holiday? We're robbing you of your money. But hey, we got to use the proper language. Lower your voice. Be calm. Take it. Bend over. We're the people that will tell you how to live and the way you should live. We're in control. You're just a servant in the neo-feudal society. Now get back online and wait your turn.
Are there any markets right now you're bullish on?
None. Other than I'm bullish on gold. Because I believe when gold prices spike, they're going to go through the roof. What's the downside of gold? $1,000? Trading at what, about $11.60, $11.70? Another $160 down? What do they say it costs to take gold out of the ground? $1,200 an ounce? So to me, that's the only one I'm bullish on. I don't give financial advice. Only the way I see it. Because why would I want these currencies that are backed by nothing, worth nothing, and losing value? Big thing with Greece, Jim, is that on Sunday they're going to vote up or down on the austerity measure. If they vote no, although the Greek government in charge now is saying that this doesn't mean they're going to leave the euro, you bet they're going to leave the euro if they vote no. Because this thing is going to collapse real fast. And when one country leaves it, you're going to start seeing other countries move to leave it too. By the way, in the Trends Journal, you go back to our back issues, we said this was going to happen when the euro was created. We said it was a fraud from the beginning, it was going to rob nations of their sovereign rights, and it was going to end in disaster. It's all there, and now it's unfolding in front of our eyes.
What's the latest on Ukraine?
What's the latest on Ukraine is that Gazprom is saying they're going to shut off the natural gas because they're not paying them, and they want advance payments. And there's still a war going on there. It's only going to get worse. And the hypocrisy of the Western media as the Kiev government slaughters the people in the east of Russian descent, some 6,000 already, it hardly makes the news. But if you kill a couple of people in France or one in Canada or a few in the United States, we'll rob you of all your rights, we'll listen to everything that you do, and we're going to say that we're going to protect you. But kill a bunch of Eastern Russians or Ukrainians of Russian descent, that's okay. That doesn't make the news. They don't count as much as other people do. And it's the same thing, whether it's in Africa or other countries. Look what's going on in Syria. All the people being slaughtered. That's up to almost 300,000, over 4 million refugees, and it hardly makes the news. They don't count as much as white folks when they get killed.
Is bombing ISIS doing anything to help that?
Who's ISIS? What's ISIS? Who created ISIS? Again, what does everybody have? Attention deficit disorder? What was going on in the Middle East before the murderers in chief, those prime ministers, presidents, and chancellors waged war in the Middle East that killed over 1 million people in Iraq and destroy their nation. We're the people that are wondering why they hate us, and they created radical groups that destroyed Afghanistan and are still there. And how about America's liar-in-chief, the great betrayer Obama, who said he was going to be out of Afghanistan, and now we're keeping troops in there, and they call them advisors as they're still fighting. ISIS? Would you be a member of a radical group if your family was murdered, your country was destroyed, and conditions kept getting worse as you have occupying nations taking over your cities, states, and nation? Look what they did in Libya. You got a migrant problem in Europe. Didn't have one when Gaddafi was there, did we? No. But hey, we got to get rid of that dictator and destroy the entire region, turn it into chaos because of a new liar-in-chief in the wings, Hillary Clinton. We came, we saw, he died. She said on CBS TV when she heard of the death of Gaddafi. Her, Samantha Powers, and Susan Rice, the three witches of Macbeth in Washington that launched that war, along with, I'm sure your prime minister was behind it, Sarkozy was in France. Matter of fact, they were even doing deals, and these WikiLeaks just came out with the emails going back between the French Secret Service and Hillary Clinton's emails. It's there for everybody to look at if they go on YouTube or Blacklisted News, doing deals with the rebels that they were paying to overthrow Gaddafi to get an oil deal with Total. So, you know, what a surprise for ISIS. Is bombing them doing any good? Who are they bombing? They're bombing compounds. How about people's houses? Who made up this word compound? How about slaughtering innocent people? Oh, no, we're getting ISIS. Let me get this straight. I want to get this straight for everybody. I do not support the troops. It's a volunteer army. That's their trip. You want to join the army, knock yourself out. Don't tell me to support you in your career. I'm not asking anybody to support mine. Number two, just so everybody that can add, grab your pencil and paper and add up the victories that America has had since World War II and come up with 0. And then add how many people they've killed around the world. Vietnam, over 3 million. Iraq, over 1 million. Destroying the entire Middle East, propping up dictators, along with Africa. And yet they come out with all their arrogance, rolling out these retired losing generals and the grand strategies that they have, and the intelligence that they have. Yeah, they have the intelligence of a moron, of an imbecile and a psychopath. And that's why on September 20th, in Colonial Kingston, we're launching Occupy Peace. And we're honoring thy founding fathers in the most historic corner in the United States, the only place where there's a pre-Revolutionary War building on each corner, where the seeds of democracy was sown. And every founding father, beginning with Washington, a real commander-in-chief, not like these little boys like you got up there or over here, that can't fight their way out of a paper bag and call themselves commander-in-chief. This is a guy that led the troops in battle, a warrior. No foreign entanglements was his farewell address. No foreign entanglements. Franklin, Madison, Adams, one founding father after another. And then I get this baloney from morons saying, well, you know, the world was a lot different back then. The world was at war back then, just like it is today. Only the means of delivering the weaponry are different. Our founding fathers were scholars, not little psychopathic imbeciles. And all you have to do is look at the presidential reality show underway here in the States to verify that. The only way for peace and prosperity is no foreign entanglements, bring home the troops, seal the borders, and rebuild America. Because all that war is giving us is a path to more war. You got these imbeciles now, they're pumping up, talking about how America's going to fight a war with China. I don't know how they'll fight a war with China or Russia, but I know how it will end. Exactly as Albert Einstein predicted. I don't know how the Third World War will be fought, but the fourth will be fought with sticks and stones.
The mainstream media made a big deal about the Confederate flag, but I haven't heard a word about the Trans-Pacific Partnership Agreement. What do you make of that?
Well, again, you know, they used an incident committed by a madman to deflect the realities of what's going on. It's not the Confederate flag. Are there racists in the United States? Of course there are. There are racists in every nation. But this is not a racist nation. If it was, we would not have a black president. This is not a racist nation. If it was, we would not have a black attorney general. If it was a racist nation, we would have had another attorney general to take the last attorney general that was black. We would not have the head of the Homeland Security that's black. We would not have Susan Rice or Condoleezza Rice. We wouldn't have a Colin Powell. So what they do is they use these issues to turn people against people. In a racist nation, you would never have that. You want a racist nation, you look at apartheid South Africa. Or you could even look at apartheid Israel. But don't call America a racist nation, anyone. Are there racists in it? Yes. But you would not have the leaders of our government being black if it was a racist nation. There are racists within it. As to the Trans-Pacific Partnership, as I said, Obama's the betrayer in chief, a total fraud that should be brought up for treason. Go back to his campaign speeches when he was candidate Obama in 2007 and 2008, and how he was going to revisit NAFTA because it was hurting Americans in the Rust Belt states and other states because of all the jobs that we lost because of that agreement. And then he pushes through the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And that we the people in this land, that freedom and democracy that they're selling overseas, are not allowed to read freedom and democracy. They listen to everything we're talking about, watch every step that we make, and rob us of our constitutional rights, and won't even allow us to read what's in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And the only reason we know anything about it is because of WikiLeaks. And this is the fraud that campaigned for transparency when he was candidate Obama. And now the follow-up fraud behind him is Hillary Clinton. She won't even talk about it, and they're giving her a free ride. This is the woman that's coming out all in favor, of gay rights, which my stand is, I could care less what people do. Whatever you want to be, whatever you want to do, I could care less. But that hypocrite, along with Obama, they came out against gay marriages, and now they're all for it because that's the way the polls are going, and she's a candidate. And on the Republican side, as I said, you look at the cover of the Trends Journal, it's the presidential reality show. It's a freak show. And it's being controlled by the Bloods and the Crips, better known as the oligarchy of the Republicans and the Democrats, murderers and thieves. Murderers, you bet. I'm really good at killing people, said Obama. And that's the quote from a book that he has not denied, and how he condones and supports and sits over the drone strikes of killing people that have been convicted of nothing, only suspected of something in foreign countries, and wages wars, as Bush did and others and Clintons, killing millions. So they're murderers, both parties, and thieves. They keep stealing our money in the name of too big to fails, loan guarantees, payoffs, and bribes that they like to call campaign contributions.
How come laws are being passed right now that affect people's health and not in a good way?
Well, because, again, you look at, here in California, they just passed a law signed by the governor that if you have a child in school, it's being forced to be vaccinated. And then you look at the data that just came out of the billions of dollars just in the last year that Big Pharma has given to doctors for, quote, research, speeches, and consulting. So you have no rights anymore. This would have been great for Nazi Germany. They are forcing everybody to get vaccinated. I suppose you don't want to. And wait. Oh, whose lives are they putting in threat? They say a couple of kids who are so sick they can't get vaccinated? If everybody's vaccinated, what's the big deal? Your kids are protected. Parents don't have the right. You have to be drugged by Big Pharma. It's become a drug-dependent society. People are all whacked out. Look at the ads on American TV. The list of side effects is longer than the ad for how it's going to help you. And yet we're being forced into this? Again, it's a multinational takeover at every level. You talked about the Trans-Pacific Partnership. It gives transnational companies the rights over sovereign nations. Oh, you don't want to have your land fracked? Well, we say that's against our policy, and you don't have the right to stop it. We'll tell you what to do. We're in charge. Again, it's the merger of state and corporate powers. Mussolini called it fascism. So do I.
Is there anything the average person can do if you don't feel you're going in the right direction?
Yeah, it's that's what we're trying to do with Occupy Peace. This isn't a rally to yell and scream. We have an agenda, and there's three-part. Number one, the United States Congress has not declared war since World War II. They've given the presidents the right to fight them. Stop that. Let Congress vote. Number two, we'll tell Congress how to vote. We want a referendum in each state ballot. You want to go to war? We're the ones that pay for it with our money and our lives. We'll tell you how to vote. Number three, close all the bases overseas and rebuild America. Well, they estimated just the Afghan and Iraq war are going to cost $6 trillion. Can you imagine what $6 trillion would have done to bring peace and prosperity to America? With peace comes prosperity. Look at the RAND study that just came out. They showed RAND. Now, this is not a left-wing organization. You can't get further to the right. They showed that if Israel had peace with the Palestinians, it would be worth several $100 billion in prosperity. So if it's good for Israel, it's good for the rest of the world. So that's how you can do it. And to remember the wonderful quote by Samuel Adams. It does not take a majority to prevail, but rather an irate, tireless minority keen on setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men.
What are your thoughts on the people running for U.S. president right now?
It's disgusting. As I said, it's outlined in our Trends Journal. It's the presidential reality show. There's not one I would vote for.
Gerald, are you thinking about running for president?
No, I'm not. No, it's not. It's not what I do. It's not in my mind at the time. And I think our work is better served the way we do it. The motto of the Trends Research Institute is think for yourself. And the gratification that we get is the people saying to us over and over again, whether it's subscribers or people that just tune in to shows like yours or others, thank you for waking me up. Thank you for giving me the courage to speak out. And it's kind of like what Margaret Mead said, when enough people have the courage within them, the self-respect and the dignity, and take positive change, that's when everything changes. And it's up to the individuals. When enough individuals rise up against the people that are leading them and start leading themselves, then we'll see a better world for it. People know the answers. And as people ask me, what should I do? And I keep saying the same thing. Get in shape, physically, emotionally, and spiritually. Rise to the highest levels that you can. And, I have a definition for hell. And for me, again, not proselytizing, just the way I see it, it's taking that last breath and knowing you weren't the person you said you were or could have been. So, when enough people start feeling that, it becomes what Sam Adams said. It's the setting brush fires of freedom in the minds of men. And so the opportunity, by the way, as I see it, has never been better than now because the vacuum is so big. Everybody could call a loser. All they have to do is look at the people running their countries, and they see what a sham it is. So the opportunity for change now has never been greater than I've seen in my lifetime, particularly for a third party in a new way. And it's going to be interesting to see what happens in Greece and how the people vote. The future is in their hands, direct democracy, and from a country that gave us democracy and so much. It's kind of apropos that it's happening right now in their own country. So you're going to see by the end of Sunday how people decide their own future. And to me, that's the way it should be. Let the people vote.
Can you tell us more about the Occupy Peace movement this September and how people can get involved?
Well, we're going to have, leading up to the Occupy Peace rally, where we're having a conference here. Among the speakers so far is Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, the former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan. And they could go to our website, trendsresearch.com, for more information about the conference and the Occupy Peace movement. And the occupypeace.us is a separate website we've put up as well. So the future's in our hands. I began my career, Jim. I used to run political campaigns in Westchester County in New York, which was the richest county at the time in the United States. And I was the assistant to the Secretary of the New York State Senate. And I also designed and instructed American politics and campaign technology at St. John's University. And I was a government affairs specialist for the chemical industry for a number of years in D.C., between D.C. and Chicago. And and Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, of course, the Assistant Treasury Secretary under Reagan. If people knew how easy it is to change things and what frauds are standing in their way, they would not believe it. It's the Wizard of Oz. It's Alice in Wonderland. It's every freak that you ever knew, and that's all it is. It's both of those grotesque faces and gutless people that talk tough and have nothing behind them. And if people could only understand that, they would see that the future is in their hands to create something without all this fear and hysteria that they keep pumping on us all the time, and start bringing more joy and beauty into our lives. And that's a big part of Occupy Peace as well. Joy and beauty rather than fear and hysteria.
Gerald, thank you very much for speaking with This Week in Money.
Thank you, Jim.
My guest has been Gerald Celente, publisher of the Trends Journal, available online at trendsjournal.com. Coming up next, Money Bubble author John Rubino on This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is archived online at talkdigitalnetwork.com.
My guest is John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including the bestseller The Money Bubble. Welcome to This Week in Money, John.
Hey, Jim. Good to talk to you.
Well, everybody's talking about what's going on in Greece, and is it going to affect us on the other side of the pond? Well, what does the future look like for Greece right now to you?
The future looks eventful. By Monday, Greece will have had their referendum, and the Greek people will have voted yes or no on the austerity proposals that the creditors, the big European institutions, want to impose on Greece. And right now it looks like it's a 50-50 shot in the election. It looks kind of evenly divided between people who don't want to leave the euro and want to do what they have to do to stay within the eurozone, and people who are just so sick of being impoverished by the cuts in government spending that have been imposed at the behest of Germany and France and the IMF and the European Central Bank, and just don't want to deal with that anymore. They want to either just leave the Eurozone and go back to the drachma, or insist that the Eurozone bail them out with some kind of a really serious debt forgiveness program, 30% off the top of their debt or whatever. And, either way, it's going to be really messy in the not-too-distant future for Greece, but a different kind of messy, because if they, for instance, get a debt cutback, where all of a sudden they have 1/3 less debt, that might make it possible for them to cover their obligations and stay in the Eurozone and continue to be a functioning country in current terms. But it would also cause Italy and Spain and Portugal to line up for the same deal, because they can't function in the Eurozone as it's set up either. And they're way bigger than Greece. So cutting a big chunk of their debt, just forgiving it, means somebody else has to accept a huge loss, the people who own those bonds. And that's big European banks, and of course the European central banks, and a lot of hedge funds, and then there are derivatives written on that stuff that are tucked away in bank balance sheets and on hedge fund balance sheets all around the world. Nobody knows where it is or what happens once those insurance policies are activated. In other words, if somebody has guaranteed to you that they're going to cover your losses if some Italian bond defaults, then they owe you money if Italy gets this huge debt haircut. And they've got to come up with that money somewhere, and probably they don't have the money, and then they go bust, and you get this cascade failure of the global speculating community. And that's what we'd be looking at if the Eurozone just forgives Greece's debt. And that's why they don't want to do it, because they don't want to deal with the follow-on consequences of that policy. But on the other hand, if Greece just leaves the Eurozone, then nobody knows what will happen, because there's no legal mechanism, first of all, for a country leaving the Eurozone once it's adopted the common currency. And all Greek bank accounts are in euros, all Greek bonds are denominated in euros, and so going back to the drachma is a bookkeeping nightmare, if nothing else. And it means also a lot of losses for people who had Greek bank accounts and who own Greek bonds, although it's mostly now the European Central Bank and the IMF. So it's not that big of a deal from the point of view of bank profitability, but it is a big deal from the point of view of taxpayers because they have to eat the losses. So it's messy no matter how you slice it. And it's not clear how it plays out because, like I said, the election is basically 50-50 at this point. And even if it goes one way or the other, it's not clear that the Greek government accepts that verdict and then implements whatever the voters say to implement, especially if it's a really close vote. So we are looking at a crisis with legs. It's going to go on for a while, and it's very possible that it spreads to other countries. So whatever happens this weekend will be a catalyst for turmoil of some kind in the next couple of weeks, but it might not be the end of the process. You know, it might just be one more signpost on our way to collective financial catastrophe rather than the catalyst of that financial catastrophe. So we'll see. I don't know. Interesting process, fun to watch.
Could you see a run on other European banks because they're scared the same thing's going to happen to them because their governments will be so busy bailing out Greece?
Yeah, that's the big risk right now, and it was happening when European markets were open. Italian banks were plunging. You know, nobody wants to own stock in an Italian bank, and nobody wants to have an Italian bank account right now. And the only people who do are doing so reluctantly. So, I mean, Jim, if you had an Italian bank account, knowing what you know now, would you leave that money there? I certainly wouldn't. I would yank it out, and I'd either put it under the mattress, put it in a tin can in the backyard, or shift it over to Switzerland and pay a negative interest rate to have my money in Swiss francs until the smoke clears. And you got to figure that a growing number of people, now that they're seeing the lines around the corner at Greek banks, and people, waiting for hours to get to the ATM only to find a sign up there that says no money. They're seeing that, and they understand that they could be next. So you have to figure that bank runs are in the cards for Italian banks and Spanish banks and Portuguese banks and maybe Irish banks, although the Irish have done a much better job of dealing with the financial crisis than some of the other European countries.
John, how did Ireland do it?
Ireland bit the bullet. They just accepted austerity right up front and lowered their local cost of doing business. And they're not out of the woods yet, but they're not in the news, right? We don't hear about them, even though they were at one point as bad off as Greece. And so they did what is called an internal devaluation, where instead of cutting the value of their currency, they made it cheaper to do business in their country. You know, wages went down, other costs went down, and they have a nice low corporate tax rate, which has always been attractive to foreign companies wanting to set up European subsidiaries. And so combine all that, and they're not in crisis. They're still not growing robustly with lots of jobs for young people, et cetera, the way you hope to be in a healthy system. But they're in much better shape, much less precarious shape than someplace like Italy is, which really didn't fix anything. You know, Italy just kept on borrowing. You know, you look at a chart of Italian government debt, and it slopes upward in the sense that it's rising at an accelerating rate. So it's going parabolic, which means they're in the same boat as Greece, basically, where government borrowing is spinning out of control, and there's no way to stop it. And there's certainly no way to pay these bills long term, especially if interest rates were to tick up from here. You know, what bailed these guys out in the short run is that Eurozone interest rates, with the advent of quantitative easing, et cetera, went back down again after spiking during the first Greek crisis in 2011. Italy is kind of the real story here because Greece is a small country that can be fixed with understandable amounts of money. But Italy needs $1 trillion or more euros probably to lower their debt to the point where they are a fully functioning member of the Eurozone. And that's too much. You know, if the ECB created that kind of money, it would cause a currency crisis probably. And if Germany handed them that kind of money, it would destroy Germany's balance sheet. So they're not an easy fix. And that's what everybody's really worried about with Greece. That's why Greece is so hard to fix, because it sets a precedent that Italy is going to want in on. So if you bail Greece out, Italy comes up and says, well, I want 30% off my debt too. And then we're talking numbers that are too big to manage. So everybody's looking around for who's next, and they're focusing on Italy. And so just lately, Italy's interest rates have started to go back up again. And you would think that people are pulling their money out of Italian banks as fast as they can do it, because if Italy's interest rates go back up, that makes their government borrowing costs unmanageable. That destroys their government budget, and then they have some kind of a crisis where they become the next Greece, only on a vastly bigger scale, and that's a whole different animal. So if you got money in an Italian bank right now, what you've got to be worried about is that at some point in the future it's converted to lira at a 50% discount, and you don't want that, obviously. So you move your money, either you take it out in cash, you hide those euros in a safe place, or you switch it over to a Swiss bank account and you park yourself in Swiss francs for a couple of years, pay the negative interest rate, and just hope that you make it back up in currency appreciation, and then switch back to whatever your country is using when the dust clears. But see, that's chaos if enough people do it, and that's the thing that keeps Eurozone bureaucrats up at night, because they know it could happen very easily, and they know it could spread not just to Italy, but to Spain and Portugal and maybe Ireland and who knows where, if it gets going, and that will be uncontrollable at that point. And so Greece, since it represents the first step in this process, is extremely important. You know, they have to get Greece right to keep the contagion from spreading to the rest of the Eurozone, but they don't exactly know what getting it right means. You know, they aren't really sure what the right answer is, whether they should just let Greece leave, or whether they should bully Greece into accepting basically a capital D depression for a really long time in order to keep them in the Eurozone. Or they don't know whether the right thing to do would be to actually bail Greece out. You know, give them a 30% haircut, and then hope that Italy and Spain don't demand the same deal. But none of these things are risk-free, and really none of them are even probable fixes. It's unlikely that any of these things save the Eurozone, because it has this fatal design flaw, which is that they're not the United States of Europe. They're a bunch of different countries using the same currency, but following their own national interests and their own national characters. And you know, having Greece, Germany, Italy, and Spain, and France all kind of, you know, sleeping in the same monetary bed together is something that you wouldn't think would be easy to do, and has turned out to be extremely hard to do. So they're not succeeding, and they don't know where to go from here. You know, the ultimate goal was always integration, where they've got one national budget or supranational budget, and one defense budget, and one military, and one court system, largely dominated by Germany and France. That was the ultimate goal of this, but it's not working out. And,
well, I was going to say, a court system, France, you're guilty until proven innocent. Everywhere else, it's the other way around. Who wants that system?
In Germany, the judge is German, which isn't really an attractive idea either. You know, so I don't know. I mean, I don't know what the solution is for this.
What about Puerto Rico? It says its $73 billion debt is not payable, and it's mostly owed to U.S. financial institutions. What's that going to do to the markets in North America?
Yeah, that Puerto Rico is one that kind of snuck up on us. Nobody's really that well versed in it, I don't think. I certainly am not. It looks like the problem with Puerto Rico is that it's kind of a Latin American country, but it has to operate under some of U.S. rules, like minimum wage laws and stuff like that, which doesn't really work in a relatively poor country. And so they ended up taking on an awful lot of debt that they can't pay off. And I don't think they're extremely risky in the sense that Greece is, because we could bail them out with pocket change in terms of the amount of money that we've been tossing around in the last few years, you know. Way cheaper to bail them out than it was to bail out the big banks in 2009. And probably cheaper to bail them out than it will be to bail out Illinois when they go bankrupt, which they're rapidly headed for. So Puerto Rico, I don't think, is going to cause any reverberations beyond their own problems. You know, they might get poorer, and their life might get much harder for Puerto Ricans, but it's not going to be something that knocks 20% off the Dow Jones Industrial Average this year. And again, I'm not an expert on Puerto Rico, but that seems to be the case. And so, in the sense that it's yet another country to blow up, it's notable. Because Greece blowing up is one thing if it's the only thing that happens this year, but if it's one of 3 or 4 things, Ukraine going bankrupt and Puerto Rico defaulting on its debt, and Greece and then Italy becoming a crisis right after that, that would make 2015, 2016 a really stressful stretch for the global financial community. And we can't really handle a lot of stress because we're already grossly over-indebted. Countries are like families in that sense, that you can get through a problem if you have money in the bank and you don't owe anybody anything. But the same problem, if you've maxed out all your credit cards and your student loans are coming due and you owe money on your car and your house, that same problem, it can be unmanageable. It can be the thing that causes your life to spin out of control. And that's what the global financial system is like right now. We've spent the last 30 years borrowing money that is in amounts either unwise or insane, depending on which entity you're talking about. And now we really are pretty fragile. We can't handle the kind of crisis that we might have been able to handle back in, say, the 1970s when our global balance sheet was in pretty good shape. So you can't discount something like Puerto Rico because we're more fragile than we used to be. So you can't brush anything off anymore. And let 3 or 4 black swans all land at the same time, and all hell will break loose. We could have a global financial contagion that makes 2008, 2009 look like a little localized, no big deal kind of affair. And, because you got China in the mix right now with too much money, or too much debt. And they've got a bear market in equities going on right now that they really don't know how to fix. And, of course, you've got the European thing we just talked about, and you've got the U.S. now adding debt again. We didn't deleverage at all since the 2008-2009 crisis. We've actually added a lot more debt. We've shifted it around from the private sector to the government, but we are more indebted now overall than we were 5 years ago, when debt almost destroyed the global financial system. So we're not in great shape either. And the U.S., the risk here for us, I think, is that the rest of the world gets so chaotic that a lot of capital flows into the dollar, pushes up the value of the dollar, and then causes problems for us, which we don't know how to handle. Let the dollar go up by another 20 or 30%, which it easily could in the event of a Chinese financial crisis or a European financial crisis or Japan's demographics and debt combination finally biting, one of those things happening. And the dollar would get a lot more valuable. And that would cause problems for us that we don't know how to fix. So you could see a crisis starting in one place, spreading to another place, then spreading to a third place, and then becoming basically global very, very easily with the global balance sheet as fragile as it is. So that's what we should all be worried about. Greece is fairly serious. Puerto Rico is not serious, but it is an example of what's going on out in the world, that there are probably more Puerto Ricos out there than we know now. And so it could easily start in 2015 with a few crises like we're seeing right now, and then spread to turn 2016 into an absolute nightmare from a financial standpoint. And so that's what the world's governments are desperately trying to avoid right now. They all have their own problems. And you and I haven't even talked about the war on cash yet, Jim, which is the next stage of this. So if we have time, that's a fascinating story in its own right.
John, thank you very much for chatting with us.
Sure thing, Jim. Enjoyed it.
My guest has been John Rubino, author of several books on the economy, including The Money Bubble, his website, dollarcollapse.com. That wraps up the show for this week. I'd like to thank our guests, Ross Clark, Gerald Celente, and John Rubino, and thank you for listening. Comments or questions for This Week in Money can be emailed to info@howstreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. We're back next week with more This Week in Money.
This Week in Money is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.